True Scary Countryside Stories to Fall Asleep To, Volume 3. If you've ever driven down a road so dark that your headlights felt like they were swallowed whole by the night. If you've ever sat on a porch in the middle of nowhere and felt something watching you from the tree line. If you've ever heard a sound out in the fields that didn't belong to any animal you'd ever known, then you already understand why people who live far from the city sleep differently than everyone else. They sleep lighter, they wake faster, and some of them don't sleep at all anymore. Tonight we're going back out there, back to the countryside, back to the dirt roads and the broken fences and the farmhouses that creak when nothing is moving. Back to the places where the sky gets so black at night that you forget what stars look like. Back to the stories that the people who live out there carry with them every single day. Stories they whisper at diners and general stores and church parking lots. Stories that most of the world never hears. But you're going to hear them tonight. Every story in this collection is real. Every name, every location, every detail has been changed or obscured to protect the people who lived through these experiences. But the fear is completely 100% authentic. So get comfortable. Turn the lights down low. Let your body settle in and let these voices come to you slowly. Like fog rolling in off a field you can't quite see the end of. Because that's what the countryside does to a person. It gets inside you slowly, and by the time you realize something's wrong, it's already too late to go back the way you came. This is Volume 3, and if you've been here before, you already know. This one is darker than the others. There's a kind of silence that only exists in certain parts of rural America. Not the comfortable silence of a library or a quiet Sunday morning in a house you know well. This is a different kind of silence. It's the silence that exists between the last streetlight you passed 40 minutes ago and the darkness that's been pressing against your car windows ever since. It's the silence of a place that doesn't care whether you're there or not. Margaret Calloway had lived in that kind of silence for 61 years. She was born in the house her grandfather built on Garrett Hollow Road in rural West Virginia, in a county so sparsely populated that the nearest neighbor was nearly 3 miles away through dense forest. She'd grown up there, married there, raised her daughter there, buried her husband there in the small plot behind the house where the old maple tree stood. She knew every sound the property made. The way the floorboards groaned on the left side of the staircase, the way the wind moved through the attic louvers in October, the way the well made a low resonant moan when the water table dropped in August. Margaret knew this land the way you only know a place after a lifetime of paying attention, which is exactly why, in the autumn of 2019, she knew something was wrong the moment she heard the footsteps on her back porch. The date was October the 12th, a Thursday. Margaret had gone to bed at 9:30, as she always did, after watching the evening news and drinking a single cup of decaffeinated coffee at her kitchen table. She was a woman of rigid routines. Routines, she had always believed, were the architecture of a peaceful life. You build them like walls and you live safely inside them. She was in that shallow place just before deep sleep. The place where your mind still half registers the world around it when she heard it. A slow, deliberate sound, the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying not to be heard but don't quite succeed. A footstep on the rear porch, then another, then a pause, then the unmistakable sound of someone pressing their weight against the back door. Margaret lay perfectly still. Her husband, Leonard, had been gone for 9 years. Her daughter, Diane, lived in Pittsburgh and called every Sunday. There was no one on her property at 9:45 on a Thursday night in October. She reached for the old rotary telephone on her nightstand. Her cell phone was downstairs in the kitchen, charging. She'd told Diane 100 times she should get a handset for the upstairs bedroom, and Diane had told her 100 times that she was right, and somehow it had never happened. Now Margaret lay in the dark with the rotary phone in her hand and listened to 3 more slow, deliberate footsteps cross her back porch. The sound stopped at the back door. She dialed the county sheriff. It took 4 rings for someone to pick up, and when they did, Margaret kept her voice as low and controlled as she could manage. She told the dispatcher her name, her address on Garrett Hollow Road, and that there was someone on her back porch. She was told that a deputy would be dispatched, but that it would take approximately 25 to 30 minutes given her distance from town. 25 to 30 minutes is an eternity when you're lying in the dark listening to someone try your back door.
Sarah.
The handle turned. Once. A slow, testing rotation. It didn't open. Margaret had deadbolted every exterior door before bed for the last 30 years, a habit she'd developed after reading a story in the local paper about a break-in 3 counties over. The handle turned once more firmly this time, and then went still. Then came the sound she would spend the next 4 years trying to explain to people who hadn't been there to hear it. A voice, low and deliberate and utterly calm. A man's voice speaking from just outside the back door, as if he was simply continuing a conversation that had already been going on for some time. He said, "I know you're in there, Margaret." She had never heard that voice before in her life. She pressed herself against the headboard and kept the phone to her ear. The dispatcher was still on the line, asking her to stay calm, telling her the deputy was on his way. Margaret told the dispatcher in a very quiet, very steady voice exactly what she had just heard. There was a pause on the line. Then the dispatcher said she was escalating the call. Outside, nothing. Silence. Then, after a long moment, the sound of something being set down on the porch. A weight. Something solid. And then slowly, the sound of footsteps moving away from the door. Crossing the porch. Descending the 3 steps to the yard. And then nothing. Margaret did not move until she heard the deputy's cruiser coming up Garrett Hollow Road 22 minutes later, its headlights sweeping through the bedroom curtains. The deputy found nothing on the back porch but a single object, an old tin can, the kind used for canning vegetables, sealed and rusted. It had been placed upright, centered on the welcome mat in front of the back door, as if it had been carefully set there as a gift, or a message, or something else entirely that no one could name. The tin can was taken as evidence. The contents were never publicly disclosed. Margaret moved in with her daughter in Pittsburgh 6 days later. She has not been back to the house on Garrett Hollow Road since. The house remains standing. As of the last account, it sits empty at the end of its long dirt driveway, the back porch weathering quietly in the West Virginia seasons. The old maple tree still standing behind the house, over the grave of Leonard Calloway, who doesn't mind the silence anymore. Margaret still locks every door before bed. She still checks them twice, but now she sleeps in a city with streetlights and traffic sounds and neighbors on both sides of the wall. And she says that she sleeps better for it. Though she also says that sometimes, in that shallow place before deep sleep, she still hears it. The slow, deliberate sound of someone who knows your name, moving carefully across your porch in the dark. She says she doesn't think that sound will ever fully leave her. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because every week we bring you the darkest, most carefully researched true stories from the American countryside. Stories that the mainstream never covers, told slowly and with every detail intact. And if you're not subscribed yet, tonight is the night to change that. Before we go into this next story, I want you to understand something about the geography of rural Indiana. The land there is flat in a way that feels almost deliberate, as if something enormous pressed its palm down against the earth thousands of years ago and smoothed it out. You can stand at the edge of a field in Shelby County and see for miles in every direction. There are no hills to hide behind, no valleys to disappear into. Just open sky above and flat earth below, and the kind of visibility that makes people who live there feel both exposed and honest. Which is why what happened above Denton Field in the summer of 2021 is so difficult to explain away. Thomas Brecker was 34 years old and had been farming the land his family had worked for 4 generations. Soybeans mostly, some corn in the North Fields. He was, by every account of those who knew him, a deeply practical man. He had a degree in agricultural science from Purdue University. He kept meticulous records. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't have what anyone would describe as an overactive imagination. On the night of July the 19th, Thomas was up late in his barn doing equipment maintenance. His wife Rachel was inside the house with their 2 young daughters. The night was clear and warm, the kind of Indiana summer night that smells like cut hay and warm soil and something almost sweet underneath, like the land itself is exhaling. Thomas stepped out of the barn at approximately 11:15 to get some water from the spigot near the side of the building. He looked up, the way you do on clear nights in flat country when the stars are out. And that was when he saw it. 3 lights, perfectly triangular in formation, moving low and slow over the north end of Denton Field. He described them as amber-colored, not bright like aircraft landing lights, but warm and muted, almost like the color of a candle seen through a paper lantern. They moved together in exact formation, maintaining their positions relative to each other. No variation, no drift, no sound. Thomas stood at the spigot and watched for what he estimated was 2 to 3 minutes. The lights moved steadily from the north end of the field toward the east, passing over the far tree line, and then simply were not there anymore. No fading, no rapid departure. They were present, and then they were gone. He went inside and woke Rachel. She came outside with him and they stood together in the dark yard for another 20 minutes, but the lights did not return. Thomas, being the kind of man who documented everything, made a note of it in his farm journal that night, including the time, the weather conditions, the approximate altitude of the lights relative to the horizon, and his best estimate of their rate of movement. He did not report it to anyone outside the family, not because he was embarrassed, but because he genuinely didn't know what channel you report a thing like that through, and because he had fields to tend in the morning and he was not going to let an unexplained light array derail his August planting schedule. But the lights came back, 3 nights later and 3 nights after that, always at roughly the same time, between 11 and midnight, always in the same triangular formation, always amber, always silent. By the 5th sighting, Thomas had set up a camera on a tripod outside the barn, a good digital camera with a telephoto lens, the kind he used for documenting crop disease. He captured footage on 2 separate nights. The footage is not spectacular in the cinematic sense. It's shaky in places because his hands were unsteady and the resolution isn't perfect. But what it shows is clear enough to make you sit up straighter in your seat. 3 distinct lights moving in perfect triangular formation over an Indiana soybean field at 11:30 at night, making no sound that either the camera or the people present could detect. Thomas shared the footage with a neighboring farmer named Paul Ortega, whose land abutted Denton Field on the east side. Paul had seen nothing unusual, but was intrigued enough to set up his own watch position that following week. On the 3rd night of Paul's watch, he saw them too. They sat together in lawn chairs at the edge of the field and watched the lights pass over for nearly 4 minutes. 2 grown men, sober, practical, rooted deeply in the physical reality of agricultural life, sitting in silence, watching something neither of them could identify or explain. Paul said later that what struck him most was not the strangeness of the lights themselves, but the feeling that accompanied them. Not fear, exactly. Not wonder, exactly. Something in between, he said. The feeling of being very small in a very large place, and having that fact suddenly and completely confirmed in a way it had never been before. The lights continued appearing over Denton Field through August and into early September of 2021. Then, as abruptly as they had started, they stopped. Thomas documented 31 separate sightings in his farm journal. The footage he captured was shared online through an agricultural community forum, and eventually picked up by several independent researchers who noted that the movement patterns and light coloration were consistent with reports from other rural areas of the American Midwest during the same summer period. No official explanation was ever offered. No aircraft, experimental or otherwise, was acknowledged to have been operating in that area at those times. Thomas Brecker still farms Denton Field. He still goes out to the barn at night sometimes for equipment maintenance or simply to check on things the way farmers do. And sometimes, he says, he looks up. He doesn't know what he's looking for exactly, but he looks. The north end of the field stays dark most nights. Most nights. Now I want you to think about the kind of house that has a name. Not a name that someone gave it officially. Not a sign by the road or a brass plate by the door. The kind of name a house earns through the weight of years and events and the stories that accumulate around it like sediment at the bottom of a still river. The kind of name that a whole community whispers without ever deciding to, until the name is simply a fact, like the name of a mountain or a river. In Tucker County, West Virginia, we return to West Virginia tonight because Tucker County has more of these names than most places. There is a property on the outer edge of a place called Davis that the locals call the Morrison Place. Robert Morrison built the house in 1948. He lived in it until 1979, when he passed away alone inside it, apparently 3 or 4 days before anyone came to check on him. The house sat empty for 2 years after that, then was sold to a couple from out of state who lasted 11 months before leaving without explanation to the neighbors. It's been sold and vacated 4 times since then. It is currently listed with a real estate agency in Elkins. It has been listed with brief interruptions of occupancy for the better part of 15 years. In 2022, a woman named Sylvia Marsh moved into the Morrison Place. Sylvia was 47, recently separated, and working remotely as a medical transcriptionist. She had grown up in Tucker County and remembered the Morrison Place from childhood, from the particular way local children always crossed to the other side of the road when they walked past it, not because any adult had told them to, but because something in the shape of the place, something in the way it stood back from the road and didn't quite seem to participate in the daylight the way other houses did, made them feel instinctively that it was better to keep a little distance. But she was 47 years old, and she'd been through a difficult 2 years, and she needed affordable housing in a familiar area, and the rent on the Morrison Place was extraordinarily low by any measure. She signed the lease in March and moved in the first week of April. For the first month, nothing happened that she couldn't explain. The house was old, and it sounded like an old house. The plumbing was original and therefore temperamental. The cellar door didn't latch properly and had to be kept secured with a sliding bolt. These were inconveniences, not terrors. Sylvia was a practical woman, and she approached the house the way she approached most problems, methodically, without dramatizing. She set up her workstation in the room at the front of the house that got the best morning light. She hung her curtains and arranged her bookshelves and put her grandmother's braided rug on the kitchen floor. And gradually, in the small ways that matter, she made the Morrison Place feel like hers. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday evening in early May. Sylvia had finished her work for the day and was sitting in the kitchen with a novel, one of those paperback mysteries she cycled through the way some people cycle through television shows. It was around 7 in the evening. The sun was still up, but had moved west of the house, so the kitchen was dim, the way it got in the early evening before she switched the overhead light on. She heard someone on the stairs, not the settling sounds of an old house, not a creak or a pop from changing temperatures, a sequence of sounds with weight behind them, evenly spaced, the way footsteps are evenly spaced when someone walks up a staircase at an unhurried pace. She looked up from her book. footsteps stopped. She sat perfectly still for a full minute. Then she got up, turned on the kitchen light and went to the bottom of the stairs. She looked up the staircase. Empty.
But some things,
She went up the
collect weight over
stairs room
time.
by room, turning on every light as she went. Everything was as she had left it. Windows closed and latched, nothing disturbed. She told herself it was the house settling. She went back to her novel, but she left all the upstairs lights on that night. A week later, she was lying awake at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep for no particular reason she could name, when she heard something from the cellar. Not footsteps this time. A slow, rhythmic sound. A rocking sound, almost, like a chair rocking on a wooden floor. She lay still and listened and counted. 12 rocks. A pause, then silence. Sylvia got out of bed and went to the top of the cellar stairs. She stood there with her hand on the bolt for a very long time without opening it. Then she went back to bed and did not hear the sound again that night. She started researching the Morrison place the following weekend. She went to the County Historical Society in Parsons and spent a Saturday afternoon going through property records and local newspaper archives. What she found there is public record and can be verified by anyone willing to make the trip. Robert Morrison, who built and lived alone in the house for 31 years, had a daughter who visited him only rarely.
Let
The
us call
neighbors
him
from that
Daniel.
era, those who are still
carries
alive
the
and can
true
be
weight
reached,
of this story.
describe him as a quiet man, not unfriendly, but deeply private. He had a workshop in the cellar where he spent a great deal of his time. In the workshop, according to a neighbor who had once been down there to help him move some equipment, there was a rocking chair, an old wooden rocker that Morrison had apparently inherited from his own father. The rocking chair was not among the possessions that were catalogued after Morrison's death. No one seems to know what happened to it. Sylvia sat in the parking lot of the Historical Society for a long time after that, watching the afternoon light change on the mountains. She called her sister in Morgantown. She did not, she told her sister, believe in anything supernatural. She believed in what could be explained. But she also believed that some places collected weight over time, and that the Morrison place had been collecting it for a long time, and that she was not sure she wanted to be the one sorting through it. She moved out of the Morrison place at the end of June. She left the security deposit without asking for it back. She moved in with her sister in Morgantown temporarily and eventually found an apartment in a building that had only existed for 8 years, in a neighborhood that had no name yet, and she has said since that there is something deeply comforting about living in a place with no accumulated history, no weight from years you weren't part of, no sounds from rooms you didn't make yourself. The Morrison place is still listed in Elkins. The rent is still extraordinarily low. If you've been watching until this point, leave a comment right now and type the words, "I can still hear it." Because if you've been feeling that creeping feeling in your chest, that tightness that comes when a story gets too close to something you can't explain, then those 4 words are exactly what this moment calls for, and I want to know how many of you are still here with me, in the dark, listening. Now, the final story of this collection. And I want to say something before we begin. Every story in this volume was submitted to us by someone who lived it. Not all of them wanted their names attached. Not all of them wanted to talk in detail. But all of them agreed to let their story be told, because they felt it was important that someone say these things out loud, that someone acknowledge that life in rural America contains experiences that don't fit neatly into the language of the everyday, experiences that get dismissed or laughed off, or attributed to tiredness or imagination or too much time alone, but that are nevertheless absolutely, completely, verifiably real to the people who have them. This final story comes from a man I'll call Daniel. He grew up in a small farming community in central Missouri, in a family that had worked the same land for 3 generations. He was 38 years old at the time of these events. He had a wife, 2 sons, and a seasonal job helping other farms with their equipment during harvest. He is, by his own description and the description of everyone who knows him, a stable and reliable person who is not given to exaggeration or flights of fancy. In November of 2020, during what he describes as one of the loneliest stretches of his life, a period when the isolation of rural living during a difficult year had begun to feel less like the comfortable solitude he was used to, and more like something pressing in on him from outside, Daniel started taking long nighttime drives. He'd done this as a teenager, back when the roads felt like freedom. At 38, they felt like something else. Not freedom exactly, more like the only available form of expansion, the only way to let his mind move outward into a landscape that had more room in it than the inside of his own head. He had a particular route he favored, a loop that took him out of town on Route H, south on a county road for about 11 miles, east on a gravel road through a stretch of woods and open field, then back north toward town on a 2-lane state road that ran along a creek. The whole loop was about 26 miles. At night, with no traffic, he could do it in 45 minutes or stretch it to an hour and a half if he drove slowly and stopped sometimes to sit in the dark with the engine off. He'd driven that loop so many times, he could do it without thinking. He knew where the potholes were. He knew where the deer crossed. He knew the barn on the South County Road that had a light that came on automatically at 10 and went off at midnight. He knew the exact spot where the creek road came around a bend, and you could suddenly see the town lights in the distance, small and warm and far away. On the night of November the 14th, he drove the loop as he always did. But when he came around the bend on the creek road where the town lights should have appeared, they weren't there. There was nothing in that direction but dark. Not the dark of clouds covering the lights, the dark of nothing being there. Daniel slowed to a stop and sat for a moment, trying to reason it out. A power outage maybe, a fog bank. He turned off his headlights and let his eyes adjust to the dark. After a minute, he could make out the shapes of trees, the pale surface of the gravel road, the glint of the creek through the tree line on his left. Everything was where it should be. But ahead of him, where the road curved back toward town, there was nothing. Not darkness with depth, just absence. He turned his headlights back on and drove forward slowly. The road continued exactly as it always had. Same curves, same roadside mailboxes at the Henderson place, same gravel transition to asphalt. Everything in exactly its right position. He drove for 5 minutes, then 10. The town should have appeared at the 8-minute mark. It appeared at the 13-minute mark. 5 minutes late. 5 minutes of road that should not have existed on a route he had driven over 100 times without variation. Daniel drove into town and sat in the parking lot of the grain elevator for a long time. It was nearly midnight. Nothing was open. He sat with the engine running and thought about what could account for 5 extra minutes on a road he knew down to the 10th of a mile. He drove the loop again the following night. 26 miles, 44 minutes, completely normal. The town appeared exactly where and when it should have. He told his wife about it a week later, matter-of-factly, the way he told her about anything unusual. She listened carefully, asked a few questions, and said she didn't have an explanation, but that she believed him. That mattered to him more than he expected. He still drives the loop sometimes. He's never had the experience again, that 5-minute stretch of extra road that shouldn't have been there. But he says that every time he comes around that bend on the creek road and sees the town lights appearing in the distance, small and warm against the Missouri dark, he feels a very specific kind of relief. The relief of things being where they belong, of the world being the right size. He says that before November of 2020, he had always taken that relief for granted. He doesn't anymore. Some things you only learn to appreciate after they're briefly and inexplicably taken from you. And that, perhaps, is the truest thing that can be said about the countryside at night. It teaches you the value of what you know by showing you, sometimes, what happens when the things you know stop being certain. When a road becomes longer than it should be. When a voice knows your name from the other side of a locked door. When lights move through the dark in patterns that have no explanation in any language you've ever been taught. These are not the stories of haunted houses in the traditional sense. They are not the stories of screaming or running or dramatic confrontations with forces beyond comprehension. They are something quieter and, in their own way, more lasting. They are the stories of ordinary people, farmers and grandmothers and medical transcriptionists and men who take long drives to clear their heads, encountering the edges of what can be explained, and choosing, afterward, to go on living, to lock their doors and watch their fields and move to apartments in buildings with no history, and drive their familiar loops and keep paying attention to the world as they know it, because paying attention is the only tool any of us actually have. Pay attention, keep driving, and when you come around that bend in the road, hope, the way Daniel hopes, that the lights are right where you left them. Because the countryside doesn't always put them back. Before we close out tonight's collection, I want to thank every single one of you who has been here since the beginning of this volume, since the very first story, all the way through to this final moment. This is not easy listening. This is not background noise. If you're still here, it means something, so let's do this right. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please do that right now. We do this every week. Every week we go looking for the real stories, the ones that don't get told anywhere else, the ones that come from people who lived in the places most of the world drives past without stopping, and we tell them carefully and completely and with the respect they deserve. Subscribe so you don't miss a single one. If you've been here from the start of tonight's video, if you made it through all 4 of these stories, through Margaret's back porch and Thomas's amber lights and Sylvia and the sounds from below and Daniel's 5 extra minutes on a road that shouldn't have had them, then I want to hear from you. Leave a comment right now and say, I made it all the way through, so I can find you in the comments and know who my real listeners are. You being here all the way to the end means everything to this channel. And if any of these stories reached you tonight, if any of them gave you that feeling, that particular tightening in the chest that comes when something you can't explain gets a little too close, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a long, dark, quiet night of stories to remind them that the world is bigger and stranger and more alive than it looks in the daylight. We'll be back next week with Volume 4. Sleep well,
Sarah.
Keep the lights on if you need to, and whatever you do, don't go investigating strange sounds on the back porch at midnight. Take it from Margaret. Some doors are better left unlocked only from the inside. Good night.